All right, welcome to the third edition of the Chicago Bears Huddle podcast. I'm Darren Doxey. I'm a staff writer.
And I'm Ryan Wood, and I'm a featured columnist.
And I figured this is the draft edition of the Chicago Bears Huddle podcast. So I guess we'll just get right into it. Are we going pick by pick, or how do you want to do this?
Well, I mean, obviously pick by pick is the easiest way to go. And people, it'll be a refresher course for people since we're a full, 10 days after the draft has actually happened.
And if any people out there who are listening were like, who are these guys? That's the boat I'm in right now. So admittedly, I'm not a big college football guy. I know about these guys, but the draft expert in this podcast will be Ryan, that's for sure.
Yeah, I did some work on NFL Draft Guide, and they were nice enough to send me a copy out. So I have some evals and some notes sitting in front of me. So I'll sit here and get technical and talk about film study with you for a little bit here. But at the same time, don't call me too much of an expert there.
All right, so semi-expert,
Semi-expert works for me. I mean, I cover college football for a living, so I mean, I know what I'm talking about, but I'm still definitely not the draft analyst guy.
I despise college football in a lot of ways, but unless it's SEC, then I'll watch, or Florida State, and then I'm miserable. But that's another story. But anyways, I guess let's get into Kyle Long. I mean, a surprise pick yet again, just like Shea McClellan was. Didn't see that one coming. I didn't even know who he was.
It's interesting because Dan Bernstein likes to paint this picture of Phil Emery as this hipster general manager, and this is another pick in the first round that kind of cements that legacy. Yep. Like, Phil Emery's that guy who walks into the coffee shop and knows the barista by first name and has that long, obnoxious order. That's the way he treats the first round of the NFL draft. He doesn't care what anybody else thinks the norm is. I mean, that's fine. You know, if Shea McClellan's your guy, you go out and you get Shea McClellan. If Kyle Long's your guy, you go out and you get Kyle Long. I think the difference between this year and last year was I thought he left some value on the table.
Agreed.
For Shea McClellan in the sense that he probably could have traded back later into the first round. There were takers there, and he could have added some picks and probably still gotten McClellan or a comparable pass rusher. Whereas this year, if Long's your guy, that's fine. You take him at 20 because I don't think there was a lot of people looking to trade into that position. So if that's really the guy that you want, I guess that's who you go with at that spot. I think the biggest issue right now is people just talking about the amount of experience that he has come out of college.
Yeah, and I remember hearing initially they were like, he could play tackle, he could play guard. I'm going, well, then what is he? You know, for me, that was a turnoff to him already because it's like, here we go, another situation. Granted, we don't have Lovie Smith for a coach anymore, so he's not going to play every single position on offense before he finally finds a spot like Daniel Manning on defense. But I mean, there's that another thing where it's like, what's he going to play? That bugged me initially.
Yeah, it is. His versatility is something you look at as a strength in some aspects, but I do agree with you when you don't have that certain position that you're comfortable with playing, that makes things. It's at least reasonable to be skeptical of that. I mean, you certainly would like a player who has established himself at a position and can come in and just be an instant plug-and-play player. And I think the hope is for the Chicago Bears that Kyle Long is a starter at guard out of the gates. But at the same time, is that really cemented from a guy who only started 4 games in college at left guard?
That's another thing.
No, I don't know about that.
That's another thing, the experience factor. When I was like, okay, let me before I call Phil Emery an idiot, which I wouldn't because actually I like Phil Emery a lot. But this hipster pick yet again, I look at it and I'm like, okay, he's really hasn't started many games. They don't know what position he's going to be. I was just like, this is almost worse than Shea McClellan. At least you knew Shea McClellan was at least a 3-4 pass rusher. I still don't know if he could be a hand on the ground guy, but I mean, and then I found out he was Howie Long's son, so that gave me a little bit of optimism because Chris Long worked out pretty well after all these years.
That's something that I look at as a major, major benefit. When you look at guys, just National Football League and guys who have a pedigree of fathers or uncles or close relatives who played in the National Football League, that's something that you kind of have to trust in just because it allows you to get a handle of the system and understand how the National Football League works. And that's something that really flusters a lot of young players get in. They're really solid athletes. They're players who have the talent to play at this level, but they get into professional athletics, the money, the contracts, the attention, everything that goes with it just kind of makes it difficult for them to settle in and really just focus on playing football. And you see a lot of these guys fizzle out because maybe they're not necessarily prepared to be professional athletes, whereas you don't really suspect that to be an issue from a guy who is the son of an NFL Hall of Famer and the brother of a Pro Bowl defensive end.
And the one thing that I was kind of made me a little bit optimistic of this pick was the fact that we have Bushrod now at left tackle. Hopefully, the left tackle position is locked down. And that I would think that would make at least part of the line instantly better. Now you only have to shuffle around 4 positions instead of 1 or instead of 5. But maybe that helps. I don't know. That's just it's the instant trying to be optimistic and not negative, which is this new approach I'm trying to take, which is really weird. It doesn't work out very well. But because I'm just negative nerd, I had to kill that character years ago. But it's just I don't know. I don't know that much about the guy, so it's like, is he a guard or is he a tackle? Either way works for me. Just don't be another Chris Williams, because the Bears can't afford another first-round setback again. I mean, still don't know what Shea McClellan is. I think he'll be a good player, but all these first-round setbacks that they've had since the, what was it, 2000, really, actually, entire Jerry Angelo era for the most part.
Oh, absolutely.
They can't afford another one of those. So when I heard this pick, and I was like, here's another risky pick. Phil Emery's going out on a limb now, 2 years in a row, really with the draft in general. So he's either going to stake his claim in the ground as I'm the guy, or clearly he's running the team however he wants to. But I kind of like that, but it also scares me because what's going to, you got to give a GM at least 3 years to judge his first draft class. In my opinion, you got to give a GM 5 years to really get a grasp of how he is. So if he keeps doing these random picks, I just hope they work out, because I don't know anything about the two guys that now 2 years in a row that I had to do research on.
The scariest thing about a selection like this in the first round is you can't have too many of these high-risk, high-reward type of picks where the difficulty winds up being 3 years down the road. He needs to be able to have – I mean, if he's going to continue to make picks like this, 2 or 3 years from now, he needs to be able to hold one of these guys up and say, look, I went out on a limb and I was right about this one. And he needs to be able to consistently do that on a consistent basis. And he just doesn't have that track record now. So what it does is it puts a lot of doubt in your mind, and you wonder, well, I hope he knows what he's doing in terms of these draft evals. You kind of have to trust him, because what other choice do you have at this point? I mean, he is your general manager. He clearly is wearing the pants in this relationship and on this organization. So he's going to be making the picks that he wants to over the course of at least the next few years, regardless of how this turns out. So you kind of have to trust him. But eventually he has to be able to take these picks and hold them up to the public and say, hey, I've done these high-risk, high-reward picks before. They've turned out well for us. So that's how you build the trust with a fan base. Right now he doesn't have that. So it's still scary as hell to have him go out and take a guy who started 4 games in college with the 20th pick in the first round, because you really expect a general manager who's going to go out and take surefire starters with first-round picks, and so far he hasn't done that in either of his first drafts.
I mean, you got to give 3 years to grade a draft class at least, but the only pick on paper right now that he's taken that I'm optimistic about for the future, I was optimistic about Evan Rodriguez, but injuries stopped him, so I'm still a little bit I still have a little bit of optimism there. But obviously it's Alshon Jeffrey, because we've seen what he can do if he can stay healthy, and that would be awesome. If he stays in shape and he stays healthy, I still think that's going to be his best pick ever, at least for the next 2 out of these 2 drafts, not ever. That's there's already an ever after 2 drafts. I don't know. Don't listen to me. Ignore me. Listen to Ryan. But I don't know. But I don't mean to move on from Kyle Long, because I'm sure we could talk about Kyle Long for a while. But I'm glad that he addressed the next 2 picks were linebackers, because if he played his cards right, we have linebackers for the future, which I doubt it, but he could.
Well, listen, the 2 big needs going in, and I think a lot of people just kind of naturally assumed that with Brian Urlacher out of the fold, the first-round draft pick would be to go to linebacker, but they they addressed it pretty steadily in free agency to go out and get a couple of guys who are going to be starters in Anderson and DJ Williams.
Yeah, and they got a guy with speed to play the middle in DJ Williams, so that was huge.
So you go out, and the 2 biggest needs were interior line and linebacker, and I think interior line was a position where Phil Emery looked at and thought, okay, maybe this is a place where hopefully we can get a guy who starts immediately, whereas we can go into the 2nd and the 4th and the 5th round, wherever he decides to take linebackers at, and get developmental guys for the future, because they're pretty set with Briggs, Williams, and Anderson in there. When they went out and got Bostic in the 2nd round, that's a guy that I'm familiar with, and that's actually a pick that I did like, because what you get is you get a very solid athlete who produced in college at a big-time university in a big-time conference. He is a stellar athlete. I mean, he's a 4.55 40 guy, 6'1", 245 pounds, big, bulky.
And he played in the SEC.
Exactly. He's a big, bulky Mike linebacker type guy. The difficulty with Bostic is coming out of the gates, he's more of a downhill Mike linebacker. He's a guy you're not going to play every single down. He's more of a run stuffing, stick his head in the hole and make things happen type of linebacker. He's not the guy. He's not Brian Urlacher drop and sink into the middle of a cover two. But they hope with his athleticism, and he's a little bit short. I know that's a worry that they have, but with his athleticism, they hope that he turns into the every down Mike linebacker that they need. Because DJ Williams, good solid pickup, but he is a 30-year-old guy, so it's not like he's the long-term answer.
Yeah, what are you going to get out of him? A handful of years, before he starts to decline physically.
So Bostic, I think, is a guy that they think developmentally really works out for them. And that's a pick that I like. I think he gives you an immediate impact guy on first and second downs. He'll contribute on special teams because at Florida, that's one of those universities where they've, especially when he had Urban Meyer there and then even moving on into the Will Muschamp area, they play their stars on special teams. So John Bostic is used to playing special teams. It's something that he's going to have no problem being comfortable with at the next level. So he's definitely going to be a guy who makes an impact and doesn't necessarily have to have the burden of running a defense from day one.
Yeah, that was one of the picks I was a little more familiar with. That he basically said everything that I was going to say. So that was one I looked at it, and at first I didn't think middle linebacker for him, and it's because of the athleticism. He's more of a downhill guy, but who knows? I mean, the fact that we don't have, I had faith in Rod Marinelli for some reason, and Lovey to turn some of these guys into decent defensive players at least, or get the best out of them, because in my opinion they did a lot of times get the best out of defensive players, not offensive players. But I don't know anything about the new defensive coordinator, so I'm kind of like, I'm not as optimistic as I would be about this pick specifically of whether he can use that athleticism and become the Mike linebackers that they want him to be, but I think the chance is definitely there.
Well, and another thing, I mean, we talked at length about Kyle Long and the NFL pedigree. John Bostic, another guy with an NFL pedigree. His dad played for the Detroit Lions.
I forgot about that.
About a guy who understands what it takes to make it in the National Football League. And you can't really emphasize enough about getting these pedigree guys because they really do understand what it takes. And I don't think that makes either of these guys a lock to be NFL stars or Hall of Famers or even 10-year vets.
Gives them an edge.
Dads were, but it does give them a competitive advantage. Like you said, I mean, you go out and you get two guys who understand what it takes to begin with, and that gives me at least a little bit more optimism, more so when it comes to Long, since there's so much more unproven, whereas Bostic, I think, is a really nice player to begin with. You add that NFL pedigree in, and I think he's a player who could potentially make an impact for the franchise for quite a long time. That's
going to be one that's going to be fun. Both these linebackers are going to be fun to watch at camp, because that's last year, obviously, it was the wide receivers were the big ticket at the training camp, and it was hard not to watch them. You had to literally pull yourself away from those guys and watch everything else. This year, I think I'm going to be pretty focused on more. I watched a lot of the line last year, the offensive line, but it's going to be a lot of linebacker for me this year with both these guys. I like the Kasheem Green pick, or whatever the hell his name is. That was another guy I'm kind of familiar with. I'm just glad they addressed the two linebackers, because knowing the Jerry Angelo era, he would have taken a linebacker in the 6th and the 7th round who's going to get cut, like Michael Okoye but I don't even know all their names anymore. There's so many bad ones. I don't even know. I've deleted those names out of my brain.
You look at Kasheem Green, and what you have is almost a complete opposite style linebacker of what John Bostic is. So you went out and you addressed two separate needs at different positions at linebacker. Green is a guy who originally came into college as a safety, and he's more of a guy that you can put on the stronger will side, and he's athletic. He can flow to the ball, but he's really going to make his impact in coverage. They think that he's going to be a solid guy. We talked about what Bostic would do contributing out of the gates. Kasheem Green's contribution out of the gates would be a guy who's possibly something of a nickel linebacker and a guy who can still play special teams. So they went out and they got two linebackers at opposite ends of the spectrum with the hope of kind of building a core here. And I think the biggest worry about the linebacking core that we had in the last show that we did was we felt solid with what they had as starters. They needed to add depth. They needed to get younger, because eventually Briggs, Anderson, Williams, those guys are all nearing 30 or over 30. They're going to be gone soon. And I think what Phil Emery really hopes is that he was able to go out and get a couple of guys who will be pillars of that linebacking core over the course of the next half dozen years or so.
Agreed. And then a guy like Green coming in and being able to, both of these guys really being able to learn from a guy like Lance Briggs, who's obviously been great for it, is, in my opinion, should be a future Hall of Famer. I don't know if he will be or not. But it's too bad that Urlacher just can't work with Bostic, or I can never say any of these guys' names right. They're all weird. Bostic, there we go. I thought there was an L in there. Bostic, it'd be great if someone like Urlacher come and work with them, but at least Green will have that Briggs. I don't want to say mentor because they're all adults, but in a sense that. So I think Bostic. I mean, I think DJ will probably be the starter, but if there's a chance Bostic, if he really wanted to, if he really comes in and presents himself, could maybe pull off being the starter because DJ Williams is good, but he's also got a ton of issues. So who knows what's going to happen in that world.
The possibility there for Bostic would be to move Williams over to the strong side and probably boot Anderson out of that trio because Williams has experience. He started games in Denver at all 3 linebacking positions in the 4-3.
Forgot about that.
He's more than comfortable moving strong side or even moving weak side. I think we're pretty cemented with Lance Briggs on the weak side, so I don't think we have to worry about anything there. But you're right. Bostic could potentially come in, wow some people, earn his place at the middle of that defense, and then move DJ Williams back over to the strong side.
Which is a win-win.
When you look at Kasim Green, though, his route becomes, even if you mentioned Lance Briggs as a mentor, even if Lance Briggs doesn't say a damn word to Kasim Green, if he shuts his mouth and watches,
that's what I mean.
He's going to learn the right way to play the weak side linebacker in the National Football League.
There's no one better to learn it from.
That's what you get from Kasim Green. He's a prototypical weak side linebacker. He is a little bit smallish. He could probably use to add a few pounds to the NFL weight room. He's somewhere between 235 and 240 for the most part. Really, when you look at it, similarly sized to where Lance Briggs is at. I mean, I assume that he'll bulk up a little bit, but he's got good lateral movement, and he is solid in coverage. He can drop into the hook zone and the flat zone, and he can make a dynamic playmaking linebacker back there. So he'll have the opportunity to learn from one of the best, and I think, like I said, there's no guarantees with either of these guys, but I think they went out and got 2 solid players who don't have the pressure of playing immediately on them. They can go out there and just learn the system and hopefully eventually be those starters.
And then that was my initial thought with Green was good pick. He gets to learn from one of the best. And I mean, what's Briggs, 33 through 34 this year? Or is it the other? Is it 32 turning 33?
32, 33.
I mean, how many more years are we going to get out of him? He's been ageless, just like Urlacher was for a long time. Except Briggs is aging is better because of the position he plays. But that's huge. If these work out, we got our future linebackers. I don't think we have our future linebackers as far as the next Urlacher and Briggs, but we might have a stopgap guy who's consistent and solid for the next 5 years till they find that next franchise middle linebacker or weak side linebacker.
Well, you look at what the other thing that I like about Kasim Green, and I mentioned the fact that I had worked for an NFL draft guide. It's called The Slant NFL Draft Guide. Check out their website, order the book. Trust me, you won't regret it. You get a lot of information in there about stuff. But we had ranked them, Kasim Green specifically I'm talking about, at outside linebacker as the 5th best outside linebacker in the draft. We had figured that his position in the draft would probably be into the 2nd or 3rd round. So that's a value pick I felt like they got in the 4th round with a guy who could have been a 2nd-round pick and that they were able to pick up in the 4th round. So there was, as opposed to Phil Emery's first draft to this draft, I felt like Phil Emery was able to get more value out of his mid to late round picks.
Completely
which is
agree.
Something that I like because when you look at, and we can talk about, Jerry Angelo really, really struggled with the beginning parts of those early round picks in the draft, especially over the last 5 years of his tenure. But when the Bears were solid and they had built a foundation and they were able to go to the Super Bowl, they had built it with a lot of really solid value picks. They were able to go out and get defenders in the 3rd, 4th, 5th rounds who wound up being potential starters. So that was one of the things that Jerry Angelo actually did pretty well. And last year, Phil Emery's first draft, I wasn't particularly impressed with what he got in the 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th rounds.
No.
And he wound up not even holding on to, I think, the 5th round pick, Isaiah Frey, got cut. Or in the 7th round,
what was the quarterback?
Pick, McCoy, he got cut.
Dan Lefevre or whatever. Didn't he get cut too, like a year later?
Well, that wasn't a kid that's not a kid that Emery drafted, though.
No, I'm talking about Jerry Angelo.
Well, I know, but I'm talking about Emery in terms of what he got last year.
I was still stuck on the Jerry Angelo thing.
The end of the draft last year, he goes out and gets Frey, I think, in the 5th round, and then that kid from TCU, McCoy, whatever his name was, 7th
that's
round.
right.
And both those guys wound up getting cut.
You know, I forgot those guys even existed. That's why I thought you were talking about Jerry Angelo for a second there. Wow.
Yeah.
That's pretty bad.
They both wound up getting cut, whereas I think this year, when you look at what he got in the back half of the draft, they have some potential contributors. I mean, moving from Kasim Green, you go into the 5th round, and you get an offensive tackle like Jordan Mills, who's another guy at the Slant that we actually had rated a little bit higher than what his draft grade wound up being.
Yeah, I thought that was a good pick late.
11th best offensive tackle, really good body, 6'5", 315 pounds, prototypical guy. And the hope is, I mean, if he gives you some versatility at tackle, that's nice. If he gives you an understudy to Jermon Bushrod at left tackle, that's even better. So it's another pick that I like. I mean, what were your impressions of Jordan Mills?
I pretty much agree with all that. I was familiar with. I looked at the offensive tackles a little bit before the draft. I came in. I have 0 notes on today. This is all me going off my head. Draft, like I said, I didn't really know much about this draft, but the Jordan Mills thing, when I looked into it, I was like, okay, that's a good value for your 4th pick in the draft. I mean, I think Green was their overall best value pick. I think he has the outside of Kyle Long's, the potential's there. I think the Green could come in and contribute on certain times of games. But I think the Jordan Mills pick was just like you said. If he just gets to learn from Jermon Bushrod, it's huge. That was a good pick. Everything I've looked into him has been basically everything. I don't want to repeat everything you said, but because you obviously know more about him than I do. But it was a solid pick for Phil Emery. That was way better than his picks last year and Jerry Angelo's late picks towards the end of his tenure with the Bears.
When you look at what you get out of Jordan Mills, it's a guy, I mean, and we've talked a lot about expectations. Kyle Long, the expectation is that he's got to be able to come in and start. So he's going to have some of that pressure on him because he doesn't have all that experience. People are expecting him to come in and make an immediate impact. But you look at Bostic, Green, Mills, the next 3 picks that the Bears make in the draft. These are all guys that the Bears are hopeful down the road give them contributions, but they don't have those immediate expectations, which kind of gives them some flexibility to come in and learn the system. Like I said with Mills, I mean, versatility's a nice, solid issue for him. I mean, he could play right tackle or left tackle, and what you get is he can come in, he has the opportunity to maybe compete at right tackle because we know that position is going to be pretty wide open in terms of Jamarcus Webb, Gabe Karimi. I'm sure they'll probably go out and add another veteran that will battle at that spot. John Scott might be in the mix. Yeah. I mean, right tackle is going to be an absolute free-for-all. Maybe Jordan Mills has a great camp and comes out as the right tackle, but the expectation for that isn't there. So he gets the benefit of coming in and really just kind of trying to learn from a solid NFL veteran at left tackle like Jermon Bushrod. I think that's going to benefit him. And if you wind up having him turn into a starter somewhere on your offensive line 3 or 4 years down the road, that's exactly what you kind of expect out of a 5th-round draft pick.
Agreed. And like we had touched in, I think, our last podcast, or maybe the first one, I'm not entirely sure, the line this year is just going to be better in general because Jamarcus Webb was a better right tackle than Gabe Karimi was, and he wasn't as bad as right tackle as he was at left tackle. So there, instantly, if he wins the job, okay, he's serviceable. He was decent, and he always got better at right tackle. And he's actually gotten better every year. It's just been like less than a baby step. But at least now you have Bushrod, who hopefully should lock that down. If Jamarcus Webb's your right tackle, at least you got a guy as goofy as he is. If Long comes in and somehow wins that right guard spot, I'm assuming he's going to end up being. Is that what they're talking him? Is he's going to be a right guard or a right tackle? Is that what the talk is?
I think they hope that he starts off at either of the guard spots, most likely the right guard to start off with. I mean, they're happy as he's an interior lineman from day one, and they think developmentally he may wind up being a right tackle. But the problem is their need right now is at guard.
And at least you'll have that experience at right tackle. Whether you like Jamarcus Webb or not, at least he's played full seasons in the NFL to help a rookie out. At least I don't know what he'd help him with because I have zero faith in Jamarcus Webb doing anything. I wouldn't ask him to tie my shoes because I'd be afraid they'd be tied together. But, there at least that experience will be there. I've rambled on for way too long.
Yeah, I mean, anyone looking at Jamarcus Webb as a mentor at right tackle has probably got their head in the wrong spot. But like I said, the impotence of the first year is going to wind up being where is Kyle Long, and I think obviously guard is the most likely spot, and then eventually he could potentially swing into a tackle position, but they're hoping that right now that he is really just an answer at guard for them. So hopefully he at least gives them that much.
And then there's still that hope that Gabe Karimi's not as bad as he is because he's not healthy, which I would hope he's healthy by now. But I still think he's just bad and he's just going to never work out. But I guess there's still that up in the air, too. So the whole right side of that line is going to be fun to watch at camp.
I'm still really optimistic with Karimi. I don't know that he's ever going to be a great player, but you talk about the injury stuff, and people are wondering why he was even on the field if he was still hurt. All I know is during training camp, I had the opportunity to do a one-on-one with him for a story that I was doing, and I talked to him. It was after they had played their first preseason game against Denver, and the thing that I just really took note of was the fact that he didn't feel comfortable on the field that day. It was a wet day. It had rained a lot at Soldier Field, and he was really worried about his footing. And I kind of came away from that interview thinking maybe in the back of his mind the injury was still an issue for him. And I think it's one of those things, and I don't want to get into a rant situation with you right now, but when you look at Derrick Rose, a guy who had the ACL injury and come back, and his issue right now is he just doesn't feel comfortable with where he is. The doctors say he's good to play, but he doesn't feel comfortable enough to play. Gabe Carimi had those same thoughts running through his mind, and it wound up having a very negative impact on the way he performed on the field in 2012.
I didn't know you had a chance to do one-on-one with Gabe Carimi. That's pretty cool. I remember seeing him at camp, and I was just never impressed with him at camp at all. And then it obviously didn't follow into the season. And I hope he's not healthy, because if he's that bad, that's just horrible. I had really high hopes for him coming into the league. I mean, that was the pick I wanted the Bears to take, and they picked him. So that was disappointing to watch him at camp, and then to see him last year. The right tackle position is going to be fun to watch, because there's going to be two bums going at it, or so what appear to be bums going at it, and hopefully a rookie who smokes them both. I doubt that'll happen, but you never know.
You look at Gabe Carimi, and the one thing that he does have going for him is when he's come out of Wisconsin, he was looked at as a bit of a mauler, and he played rather soft. I think people kind of expected him to have difficulties in terms of pass pro. The thing that really disappointed me is that he wasn't particularly strong in the run game.
I thought he was going to be way better.
That was what he was really touted for coming out of Wisconsin. This was supposed to be Big Ten lineman, Wisconsin bred, just supposed to be an absolute mauler coming out of Wisconsin, because that's typically all Wisconsin produces is just these mauling. I mean, he was supposed to be the bear. He was supposed to be that bear right tackle who came in and just absolutely messed people up, and he wasn't that. And I think hopefully he gets that mental edge back to where he lines up and just has that mean streak to him, because he didn't have a lot of that in 2012. So if he can find that mentally, maybe he winds up winning that right tackle job and proving us wrong. He could potentially even wind up on the interior at a guard spot if he really is the mauler that they say he is. I think he's going to have opportunities to get reps somewhere.
Yeah, that's for sure. I mean, really everything's wide open except for center and left tackle at this point, I would imagine. That's still, when I think about it, it's still extremely disappointing, because I thought he was going to come out, and like you said, I thought it was great. He was supposed to be a great run blocker. That's what I saw when I watched him. He really hasn't been impressive at all, and then they moved him to guard, and that was just as bad. So it's been a complete failed experiment with Gabe Carimi. I mean, Jamarcus Webb's been better, and that's just bad.
I'm going to say this right now, and we've verted back into talking about the offensive line, which is almost impossible not to do when you talk about the Chicago Bears. But going back to the draft, this is something that I'm going to be looking forward to intensely during training camp this year. The Bears take Cornelius Washington in the 6th round as a defensive end, and he has a history of legal issues. He had a DUI where he was doing like 37 miles an hour over the speed limit in 2011. He actually got suspended for the Tennessee game, which actually made me hopeful, thinking Tennessee would beat Georgia that year. Didn't quite work out that way, but what you get in Washington is a physical freak show of a defensive end. His combine numbers are absolutely insane, and with his production that he had at Georgia, this is not a 6th-round draft pick in terms of talent.
Agreed.
Or 265-pound guy who ran a 4.55 40, has a 39-inch vertical, and did 36 reps on the bench.
That's just not even right.
Are you kidding me? That's not a 6th-round defensive end. And like I said, this is a guy who produced at Georgia. I mean, he wasn't the greatest defensive end in the SEC. He wasn't Jadeveon Clowney, but he was a 3-4 outside linebacker that was really just their rush, their jack linebacker. But he has the size to play defensive end at this next level. He's got the long arms. I am looking forward so much when they get to camp to watching Cornelius Washington play, specifically in the one-on-one snares, because you know what you're going to see a lot of? You're going to see Jordan Mills, 5th-round pick, left tackle, Louisiana Tech. You're going to see Cornelius Washington. So you're going to get to see the 2s and the 3s going. You're going to have these guys matched up constantly, and they're both trying to fight their way onto the football field, and both these guys have the talent and potential to be starters at some point in their career. So you know they're going to be going after each other, and I really can't wait to watch Washington and Mills battle out there.
And I would imagine because of his speed and how much of a freak he is, that he would end up being at least starting. He would come out on third down more so, like what we thought Shea McClellan was going to be. I think he could have a better season than Shea McClellan if he gets it all together and has a good camp because, that's just 4.55. He's going to be so fast coming off the edge. I can't wait to see him in person come off the edge. This was probably my favorite pick out of the draft, just because of the raw potential that's there. I don't know how to even explain how excited I am to see this guy.
You look at, I'm certainly biased.
Maybe a little bit one-dimensional, though, with just being a pass rusher. I don't know how he plays the run. I didn't really look into anything on the run.
He is going to be, that's going to be the phase of his game that it comes around last.
And he's only 6'4", too.
He's 6'4", but he's got long arms.
Yeah, that's true.
He plays, he's a little bit light in his pants at 265 right now, but he'll probably eventually play at the next level at 275, 280 pounds. So he's going to wind up
watch Julius Peppers, please, kid. Please.
If you do anything, watching Julius Peppers would be the one thing he gets right. I think the worry, like I said, obviously, is he's had some off-the-field issues. You wonder where his focus level is. But I'm biased here because I'm an SEC guy through and through. I went to the University of Tennessee. I watch SEC football with a passion religion. I cover SEC football for a website. So I've seen a lot of this kid to know that he has just an enormous amount of potential, and I won't get my hopes up because of some of the off-the-field issues that he's had. But at the same time, if he can get himself together, and the Bears have proven in this draft alone, they've proven that they're not really afraid to go out and take risks on guys who've had a couple of issues. Kyle Long had a DUI of his own back in 2008 or 2009 when he was at Florida State playing baseball. So you got a couple of guys who they've gone out and taken risky picks with, but who have a lot of physical talent. So with Cornelius Washington, it's a guy who I've seen play a lot. I know how much talent he has, and if he can get himself together, he will eventually be an impactful player on this defensive line and a potential guy who, maybe he could potentially do that Mark Anderson thing.
That's what I was going to say. That's the kind of the role I could see him coming in if he has his head together.
Yeah, Anderson was a fifth-round pick out of Alabama, was just kind of a physical, speedy, off-the-edge guy. No one ever asked him really to play the run. You just put him out there on pass-rush situations and let him do his thing. I think that's what you get out of Washington from day one. If he winds up really putting it together and putting his head to the grindstone, he could be a player who gives you 7 sacks in a situational pass rusher type role.
Especially playing on the line he's going to be with. If Corey Wooten continues to get better, he had a hell of a season last year for someone who couldn't stay healthy prior years before that. Julius is still going to be a threat out there even as he's getting older. With Melton and everyone in the middle, though it's wide open for this kid to come in and just take advantage of third down situation where Shea McClellan didn't last year. Hopefully he can finish. Shea McClellan would get there, but he couldn't finish the play. Hopefully this kid comes in and has that Mark Anderson role, because if he has a Mark Anderson role, if he can just contribute, even not on that level, he doesn't have to have 12.5 sacks. He just got to get, like you said, if he can get 6 or 7, that's huge, because then Corey Wooten's going to hopefully be up there. Peppers will have a handful of sacks. This defensive line, it just got even better with this pick if he comes in controlled and his head on right, which is one thing that I never feared when Lovie Smith was here. I never thought I would post the Lovie Smith era and go, man, I kind of wish Lovie was here for this reason. He was good with these guys. These guys, he was like, I don't know what he did with these crazy guys who have all these off-the-field problems, but he just he was the crazy person whisperer. He needs to be on a suicide hotline, Lovie Smith. Well, anytime you got to do that, Cornelius. It's like, he would have been perfect. He would have been perfect for it. But now I don't know how Trestman is. I haven't understood a word Trestman said since he showed up here.
When you look at what Phil Emery has done in this draft, and in both drafts, really, you're kind of starting to get a picture of what he looks for in draft prospects. He is a huge, huge proponent for physical measurables, athletes who are just physically, measurably run 4.5 40s, have these verts, have these broad jumps. Clearly he puts a lot of stock into combine-type numbers. Kyle Long was a combine freak pick. Said that he graded out higher on Phil Emery's scale for offensive linemen in terms of athleticism than any offensive lineman in the history of Phil Emery as a NFL scout. So that's kind of saying something towards the type of athlete Kyle Long is. Cornelius Washington, another type of these physical freak show athletes that he went out and got, had a freak show combine. Another guy clearly that Phil Emery liked went out and got. You look at Shea McClellan last year. Phil Emery puts a lot of stock into those measurables, and whether or not it works out, we're going to wind up finding out that over the course of the next 2 or 3 years. But that's clearly the blueprint towards what he's looking for. He thinks and trusts his ability to go out and hire a coaching staff to where he can just supply these raw athletes and turn them into something. Whether or not that actually comes to fruition is still yet to be determined, but I admire his confidence because he's not really making picks to appease the masses out there. He's making picks based clearly off of what his system is at this point.
Yeah, his stamp has been put on the team 110%. And that's nice to see because Jerry's stamp was really, there was like a stamp, but it was really smudged, and he really didn't know what he was doing at the end of his tenure here.
He's rubbing his elbow in it every time.
Yeah, and it was like sweaty because Sweaty Teddy was leaning over, sweating on it. Like the paper ripped, and there wasn't even a stamp anymore. It was like leaking on the table. But all right, that took that way too far. But the one thing I wish he would have, I wasn't familiar too much at the time with the Marquise Wilson pick, and I wish he would have gotten another Johnny Knox. I looked at his size, and I was like, not a Johnny Knox, but you know what I mean, a smaller, speed guy. What's your take on Marquise Wilson as far as where his NFL prospects go?
I agree with you in terms of a wide receiver. I really thought the need was for a slot guy, a guy who, one of two things. Either a slot guy who worked well to move the chains in space, the guy who they thought Devin Hester would be, but didn't wind up being, more of like they really thought Devin Hester would be a Wes Welker type guy, and obviously he never turned into that.
He didn't even turn into like anything, period.
I thought that they would look for a slot receiver first and foremost, or a guy who stretched the field vertically, because you have Brandon Marshall and Alshon Jeffrey, who are big guys who can go up and get a jump ball, but they're not run by you fast kind of guys.
Yeah.
And Marquise Wilson isn't really either of those things, so it was a little bit weird that that's the wide receiver they went to. But I think when you're at that point in the 7th round, they're looking at value just in general, and what they did get was a wide receiver who is capable of making an impact at the next level, because what Marquise Wilson was before he had, and I won't even call it off-the-field troubles because he didn't do anything illegal or wrong, he didn't break any laws, but he had an issue where Mike Leach is Washington State's coach. Mike Leach was allegedly being really hard on him, and he thought that they were taking it too far.
Did he violate team rules or something?
Well, no, Mike Leach has a history of.
Was he the one that locked the guy in the closet?
Yeah, he was alleged to have locked Craig James's son, Adam James, in the closet at Texas Tech and wound up losing his job because of that. So there's been some questions of whether or not he is like a verbally, physically abusive type of coach. And Marquise Wilson came out and left the team pretty much on his own accord because he didn't like playing for Mike Leach. But what he was before all that drama happened, which made a lot of NFL teams question whether or not they wanted him in the locker room. People said he was soft. Whether or not that's true, I don't know. But what they thought he was before all that drama happened was a guy who probably was a 3rd or 4th round pick. He was a productive Pac-12 wide receiver, and that's a conference that really kind of like to get out there and sling the ball around. A lot of really solid skill position wide receiver quarterbacks out there in that conference. And he was a guy who was, at the upper echelon, would have been an all Pac-12 type performer. And so they went out and they did get a guy with a lot of talent. It's just didn't really fit the need at wide receiver that I thought that they had.
And I like the fact that he's tall and lanky. I've loved those receivers. The problem is now we have a big, tall, lanky tight end, Alshon Jeffrey, Brandon Marshall. Like you said, at that point, it was just value at the end of the draft. I'm not complaining that they didn't get that guy. It's going to suck not having anyone like that, because now we've got Earl Bennett. When he's got all his stuff together and he's not getting crushed over the middle, he's a good possession guy. He fights for the extra yard. Brandon Marshall, obviously we know what he is. Alshon Jeffrey, if he can stay healthy, I think will be just as good will be more of a Marquise Colston as opposed to a Brandon Marshall. But the fact that we don't have any speed on offense now from the wide receiver position, because Devin's done playing wide receiver apparently now. So where do you get that speed from? Matt Forte is not a speedster. You can put him in a slot and stuff, and he gets stuff done. But I don't know where that's coming from. That's my biggest concern coming out of this draft with the wide receiver positions, that we didn't address that. Not that every pick they had was a good value pick for the most part. So I'm not saying, oh, we should have taken this guy here. I don't know what guy we should have taken, but it would have been nice to have got that guy.
With Marquise Wilson, you look, and it's a guy who, as a junior, had 83 catches for almost 1,400 yards and 12 touchdowns. So you got a guy who could potentially be productive. But like I said, the issue becomes, where does he be productive in the Bears receiving core? Because he's more of an outside guy, an X or a Z type of guy. He's not your inside receiver. So where does he wind up cracking in the lineup, and what does his role wind up being? I think his biggest issue towards making this football team will wind up being, is he a special teams contributor from day one? Yeah. I think of all the draft picks, this is the guy. I mean, obviously he's the last pick in this draft, but he's the guy that I look at that maybe I think winds up having the best chance of not making this roster. I mean, potentially he's a practice squad player going forward. I just don't know where he fits in
that was
what
my
they're
point.
doing at wide receiver.
That's my point too. I don't know exactly where he's going to be on. I mean, we don't need anyone big anymore. I mean, this offense is a very tall, even down to the running back. I mean, Forte is what, 6'2". The entire team is tall. We don't need that. I don't know if he's going to make it. And plus, with the off the field issues, that's already coming in with a concern, I would imagine.
He's going to have an opportunity to come in and work his way into the roster, and if he proves he can play special teams, maybe they give him a shot, and he winds up being, I don't even know what you would compare him to, maybe a Devin Aroma-Shadoux kind of guy, to where he's just a guy who is able to take the field,
can catch a ball,
play 10 to 15 snaps and catch a ball or two here or there, and just give your big guys a rest.
Oh, you mean catch a game winner and then have the entire fan base want you to be the number one receiver when you're really not even like a number 3? And Devin Aroma-Shadoux? And then go to the Vikings and then be bad?
Exactly like that.
I guarantee he gets picked up by the Vikings if he gets cut. I mean, that's just a guarantee at this point.
But I mean, I would assume that he was the guy who you look at of these draft picks who I think doesn't make the roster, whereas I think all the rest of the picks that they made are probably roster guys at this point. So when you look at that, I mean, that's not what I'm going to give my overall draft grade based on, but it's nice to go out and get 5 or 6 new contributors who you feel like are going to have at least some sort of impact on this football team in year one. We've gone through the whole draft now, 1st through 7th round, all 6 picks. If you had to do it, draft grade, what do you wind up grading this draft for Phil Emery?
I'm debating between a C- or a C+. I might just give it a C overall. I don't know what our ranking system is. I might give it a C because they didn't get anything that's on paper is like, this guy's going to come in and dominate. Granted, you're not going to get that at 20. It's just not going to happen. They took a lot of value. I would say C+ because of the value in every pick that they got and the potential that's in there, especially with Cornelius Washington. I mean, oh my God, that could be the steal of that round, So I would give it a C+ because of the value. I'm not willing to give it a B yet.
See, I'm in the same boat as you. You can stick with C+, C-, because I'm giving it 2 grades as well. Because this entire draft is predicated on these risk-reward picks. Guys, with the exception of Bostic and Green, who I think are worst-case scenario, solid depth-providing linebackers. But both of those guys are also superior athletes to where their ceiling is really high. Those are the only 2 guys I think don't have a bust potential to them. The rest of these guys that they picked are very high risk reward guys, to where they could either be huge busts or be huge reward type guys. So I think you look 2 years down the road and you have potential for this draft to wind up being as high as like a B+, but for what it is now and the immediate impact, it's probably more of a C in my opinion.
That's why I said C-, C+, so I'm just going to put it in the middle and consider it a C. There's just a lot of value, like you said. There's a lot of the entire draft was high risk, high reward for them. So I mean, Kyle Long could come out and be a total bust. Just the bottom line. So I pretty much we basically just said the same thing. So I agree. C. That's what I got to give it.
Now, we went through the whole draft, and I know that we had wanted to potentially talk about the NFC North stuff, but, I mean, obviously we're getting a little bit later in the podcast. We wanted to keep this one down around 45 minutes.
Yeah, we're at like 45
now. Are you happy, Adam? 45 minutes. Jeez.
Only like 45 parts instead of 145 now. Just wait till the season when our 2-hour shows kick in. I'm sure that'll happen at some point.
But just quickly going around the NFC North, the one thing I really did want to touch upon was the Minnesota Vikings going in. They obviously had already had 2 picks in the first round, so you knew they were going to. I was really impressed with them getting Sharif Floyd at 23. Yeah. That was a guy who a lot of people thought were going in the top 5. A lot of people thought was a top 3 pick even, and I think a really potential impact performer as a 3 technique in a 4-3 system. So getting him at 23 was huge. And then I know that they really, really wanted to go out and get a playmaking wide receiver, and they traded a whole bunch to get back in at 29. And Cordero Patterson is my guy. He's a Tennessee guy. I went to the University of Tennessee. I saw this guy play every game of the 1 year that he spent at the University of Tennessee. He is a freak show athlete who's a 4.4 40 guy. I think he was a 440-meter hurdle junior college national champion at Hutchinson. So, I mean, that just kind of tells you the type of athleticism this guy has. But at the same time, a lot of raw potential there. So to leverage the amount of picks they gave up to the Patriots to get back in there at 29 to get him, I was a little bit miffed by what they did there.
Yeah, I thought the Vikings draft was great, and with the Green Bay addressing the running back position, that's kind of scary if one of those guys works out. Then they take 2 running backs. Am I thinking?
Yeah, they got John Franklin and Eddie Lacy, who personally were my 2 favorite.
I like Eddie Lacy a lot.
Those are my 2 favorite NFL-ready running backs in this entire draft. Eddie Lacy especially, I mean, they seem to have this general consensus that he was constantly banged up and that injuries are going to be an issue to him. But, I mean, he was a workhorse running back at Alabama, and he's healthy right now. So I don't understand why they seem to think because he's been injured in the past that makes him injury-prone moving forward. But that's a potential dynamite pick.
When I saw them pick Eddie Lacy, I sat there and I was like, the Packers picked the best possible pick they probably could have at the time because they need a running back. They need a running game bad and an offensive line, too, to help their running game. But if Eddie Lacy works out, this is going to be a problem, period, for defenses in the NFC North if he's healthy, which I think he'll stay healthy because if he's not taking on the full load, which not many people do in this day and age in the NFL, he should stay healthy because he was definitely a workhorse at all the Alabama running backs are always workhorses. But that's scary. That's scary. They addressed something's going to work out there at the running back position. They got better in this draft. So did the Vikings. The Bears really didn't. I thought the Lions got better too.
The Packers had a rock solid draft like they constantly do. They got a bunch of guys who I think are going to wind up being guys that factor into their system well. The Vikings had. I like what they got with Floyd, and I like what they got with the Mississippi State cornerback. I can't think of his name off the top of my head with the 25th pick. I think Patterson has the potential to be a game changer for them, but there's some risk there. So I think the Vikings had a good draft, not a guaranteed draft. They're kind of in the Bears scenario where they could be boom or bust depending on where Cordero Patterson is. The Lions went out and got Ziggy Ansah, who's the guy that they want, and I think they had a pretty solid draft too. Not necessarily full of great picks in my opinion, but they got Ansah, who is a guy with a ton of potential. The Bears really probably, starting off right now, had the worst draft of everyone. Granted, they were in the worst position of all of them. Obviously, the Packers picked behind them and the Vikings picked behind them, but the Vikings had multiple first-round picks. The Packers had like a dozen picks in general in the draft, and the Lions had a number 5 overall pick. So everybody else in the conference pretty much had the opportunity to have better drafts, whereas the Bears, it's going to come down to these risk-reward players. 2 or 3 years from now, we're going to have an answer about how this draft went, whereas right now it's just kind of, you don't know.
You throw your hands up and see in the future, pretty much. Readdress this in 2015.
So coming soon to the 2015 Chicago Bears Huddle podcast.
Episode 345.
We'll re-examine this draft class and probably have a better idea of where they're at. But now,
even next year's training camp will be more entertaining.
Yeah, I mean, we'll at least have some sort of idea. But right now, I don't know. I know there's a lot of risk-reward picks, so I like some of them. I'm skeptical of some of them. What it boils down to is, does Phil Emery know what he's doing?
I think so. I want to say I think so,
but I don't know. So. I sure hope
I
so.
think that's what it is. I think it's more hope than I think so, because everything's just like every time he picks a guy, I wasn't watching the draft. I was just keeping up with it on Twitter. And Kyle Long got picked, and I was like, well, what is a Kyle Long? I don't know what that is. Same thing I said last year. What's a Shea McClellan? I don't know. He keeps picking these weird white guys that I don't never heard of before.
It's hipster Phil Emery.
Seriously,
Phil Emery doing hipster.
He needs the glasses.
He does not care what the rest of the National Football League thinks. You know, you have those guys out there who are consensus. Oh man, this is going to be a top 15 pick. He doesn't give a damn about any of those. Like, he doesn't care about anyone else's draft grade but his own. And I admire and respect that. But at the same time, I hope he gets a better handle on what other teams think of guys that he likes, because, like I said, Shea McClellan left some value on the table there. Kyle Long, I don't think anyone was willing to trade up to 20 to get anybody in particular, but, you know, they probably could have got him in the mid-20s, so maybe there was potential value left on the table there. I don't know. I hope it works out.
Phil Emery probably like has one of those old phones where you had to like spin the dial and then you had to go back, because I'm assuming he's full on hipster if he's picking all these guys no one's ever heard of. So he probably calls on there. He might just be calling the wrong people because he's hitting the wrong numbers he can't see because his glasses probably need to be renewed. But
he's got a Nokia. He's got one of those Nokia phones.
That'd be awesome. He's texting on it
texting, and the old where you got to press the button 3 times to get to the Y.
That was the worst. Oh, imagine using that for Twitter. I couldn't.
My goodness.
I'd kill myself. I kill myself now with the iPhone.
Well,
but I think we're at like 50-something minutes, so before Adam yells at us again.
Yeah, that's good enough. The Blackhawks start in a couple minutes here.
Yeah. And there's a report that Derrick Rose may suit up in Game 3. I don't know if it's true or not, so I'm trying to track that down. So there's all this sort of stuff going on. I think we should just wrap it up.
There you have it. Chicago Bears Huddle Draft Podcast.
Yep. Thanks for listening.